Centuries ago, Dannon discovered Russians who lived long lives ate a lot of yogurt. They didn't tell you how they lived. So we gave them La Yogurt, the great tasting yogurt from America.
What do y'all got out there? I'm in Round Airport 35.
Inside of 5, but we got 5 inside of business.
It started with that call from dispatch.
Okay, I'm copying the fire part you cut out on the first part of that though.
To go to a scene of a fire that would turn into something far worse.
There are some stories that are just wrong. They don't fit. The pieces are all there, but when you put them together, the picture they make is something you don't want to see. A story that starts in the most mundane place imaginable and ends in a rabbit hole so deep and so dark, there still hasn't found the bottom. This is Austin, Texas, 1991, and this is the Yogurt Shop. A symbol of suburban safety, a place for teenagers to hang out, earn a paycheck, and kill time. It's the kind of place that's supposed to be completely, boringly normal. But the story of what happened here is anything but. Meet Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy. 17, 15, and 13. They were friends, sisters, kids, just working a closing shift, helping each other out, waiting to go home. 4 girls, 4 futures, about to be violently intersected by something truly dark. December 6th, a totally unremarkable Friday night. The last customers were leaving. The girls were cleaning up. The fluorescent lights hummed. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then the lights went out. The timeline is where things start to get murky. The shop was supposed to close at 11 p.m. The last customers saw the girls inside, along with 2 unknown men, just sitting there, watching. 11 p.m. came and went. Then 11:30, the phone at the shop just rang and rang and rang. Just after midnight, an Austin cop was on a routine patrol, just driving by, and he saw something that wasn't routine at all. Smoke, thick black smoke, pouring from the yogurt shop. He didn't know it yet, but he was rolling up on the epicenter of a nightmare that would haunt the city for decades. The fire department gets there in minutes. They bust in.
This is the, I can't believe it's yogurt.
And they are hit with this wall of heat and smoke. It's a small space, and the fire is raging in the back. As they start to get the flames under control, the scene reveals itself. And what they found in that back room is the reason we are talking about this today. It was the 4 girls, but they weren't victims of the fire. The fire was a cover-up, a brutal, sloppy attempt to wipe the slate clean. They had been bound, gagged, and each of them had been shot. The next morning, the news broke, and Austin, Texas had just woken up to its own personal boogeyman. The question wasn't just what happened, it was who could possibly be capable of something like this. The scene was a complete and utter disaster. The fire underwater used to fight it had destroyed almost everything. It was a forensic nightmare, but they found a few things. 2 different guns were used, a 22 and a 38. That suggested at least 2 killers. The register was empty, so maybe it was a robbery. But the level of violence, it just didn't add up. This felt like something else. The investigation kicked off in a whirlwind of nothing. Hundreds of tips came in, but they all went nowhere. Over 50 people were looked at as suspects, dead end after dead end. The 2 men seen in the shop that night vanished. It was like they were ghosts. Years started to bleed together. The case went ice cold. It became one of those things locals whisper about, a ghost story. The kind of brutal, unsolved crime that becomes part of a city's dark mythology. It was destined to be filed away forever. And then, in 1999, 8 years later, someone decided to blow the dust off the file, and they found something. A small note about a kid who was picked up near the scene that night with a 22 caliber pistol. A kid who was questioned and then let go. Mary Spears, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Wellborn, 4 local teenagers who police now believed were their guys. They were brought in for intense marathon interrogations, and after hours and hours of questioning, 2 of them confessed.
I only pulled the trigger once. I hear another gun go off.
No, raise your arm. Didn't say it.
Is that the gun you shot somebody with, Mike?
But don't.
Is that the gun you walked up behind somebody with and shot in the head?
The confessions were messy. They were full of contradictions. The details changed over and over, but it was enough. For the first time in 8 years, police had something. They had a story. They had arrests.
I have no comment.
Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen went to trial. Their own confessions were used against them, and they were both found guilty. Life in prison, case closed, right? The city could finally sleep again. Wrong. Because there was a ghost in the machine. A tiny piece of evidence recovered from one of the victims way back in 1991. A DNA sample. At the time, the technology wasn't good enough to test it. By the 2000s, it was. So they ran the test. The results came back, and they were a bombshell. The DNA belonged to an unknown man. It didn't match Scott, didn't match Springsteen, didn't match any of them. The only piece of hard, physical evidence in the entire case cleared the 2 men sitting in prison. In 2009, their convictions were thrown out. They were free.
I was berated and berated and berated by the police officers until they obtained what it was they wanted to hear. They were not going to allow me to leave. And I basically, they broke me down.
But that's not even the weirdest part. This is where the rabbit hole gets really deep. Years later, with even newer technology, they ran that mystery DNA profile again. This time, through the federal database, looking for a familial match, a relative, and they got a hit. A list of potential relatives, but the name that came back, the name that matched the profile most closely, wasn't some random criminal. It wasn't some drifter. It was an active FBI agent. Let that sink in. This agent, they discovered, was in Austin for a training academy on the exact weekend of the murders, just miles away. The implications are staggering. But when they tested his DNA directly, it wasn't a match. Officially, he was cleared. The explanation was that the killer had to be a relative of his, someone not in the system. The trail went cold, right at the FBI's doorstep. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us in a Kafkaesque nightmare. It leaves the families of those 4 girls right back where they started, with nothing but questions and grief. Think about what we have here. You have coerced confessions that put innocent men in prison for a decade. You have convictions overturned by a single, microscopic piece of evidence. And you have a DNA trail that leads directly to a federal agent who just happened to be in town on the exact night of the murders, only to be explained away as a distant, untraceable relative. Is this just a string of cosmic bad luck, a series of unbelievable coincidences, or is there something more to this story, buried under decades of botched police work and official redactions? We don't have the answers. Maybe we never will. The only thing that's certain is that on a cold December night in 1991, something truly evil walked into a yogurt shop in Austin, Texas, and in a way, it never left. A fire that was put out 30 years ago, or a darkness that is still burning. And for 30 years, that's where the story ended. A cold case, a collection of haunting questions, a genetic profile of a ghost, and a bizarre dead-end trail that led to the FBI. It was the perfect, unsolvable mystery, a wound that refused to heal. But then, something changed. Technology, as it always does, kept evolving. The same science that exonerated 2 innocent men had a new trick up its sleeve, a technique that has become the last best hope for cold cases like this one: investigative genetic genealogy. It's a revolutionary process and a slightly chilling one. Investigators take an unknown DNA profile and upload it to public genealogy websites, places where everyday people share their DNA to find distant relatives. By finding a 3rd, 4th, or even 5th cousin of the unknown subject, they can start to build a family tree, a web of genetic breadcrumbs. They can work backwards through generations, through birth certificates and public records, until that web narrows to a single possible name. For years, a dedicated team of cold case investigators and genealogists worked in secret on the yogurt shop DNA. They built tree after tree, chasing down digital ghosts, and in 2024, after decades of dead ends, they finally found him. The ghost finally had a name: Robert Eugene Brashers. So who was he? He wasn't a phantom. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man who had been hiding in plain sight. He was a US Navy veteran. He had worked for the government, holding a top-secret clearance at an aviation company. He was married. He had children. He lived a life. And he had a criminal record: burglary, theft, nothing as violent as murder. But he was in the system. And most importantly, he was living and working in and around Austin, Texas in 1991. He was there all along. He was one of the hundreds of names that were probably looked at and dismissed. Just another face in the crowd. He was never a suspect, never interrogated. He was a shadow that passed through the investigation without anyone ever noticing. Investigators were certain the YSDR DNA profile, that unique genetic signature recovered from the crime scene, was a definitive match. The man who was in that yogurt shop, the man who left his DNA behind in the middle of that horrific scene, was Robert Brashers. After 33 years, the central question of who had finally been answered. But this is the yogurt shop case, and in this story, there is no such thing as a simple answer. There is always another twist. Because when investigators finally tracked him down, ready to make an arrest and close the books on one of America's most infamous cold cases, they discovered they were too late. Robert Brashers died in 1999. He was 41 years old. Brashes killed himself during a shootout with police in 1999, years before the technology existed to finally unmask him. He escaped justice by simply living his life and then dying. There will be no trial, no conviction, no day in the court for the families who have waited for over 3 decades.
Our families are still too small, still missing an essential ingredient, and we are lesser for it.
They have an answer, but they will never have a resolution. It's a uniquely cruel kind of ending. And his identification brings up one final chilling question. The evidence from the scene always pointed to 2 killers. 2 different guns were used. Robert Brasher was one of them. But who was the other? Who was his accomplice that night? Was it someone we have already heard of? Or is there another ghost still out there? Another shadow who has gotten away with it for 33 years? The case of the Austin yogurt shop murders is, in a way, finally closed. But it will never truly be over. The identity of one of the killers has been dragged out of the darkness and into the light. The ghost finally has a name. But the haunting is far from over.